So,
Okay, Catherine.
So my name's Catherine. Why I work with children, I just feel like they're just this incredibly wonderful resource of wonder and fun and spontaneity. And I heard someone say, I think in one of these sessions one day, that they're just the best collaborators in the whole world. So I feel like it's just totally cheating to have so much fun, but hanging out with children is just great.
Yeah. Hi, Alex.
hey, Flick.
I, of course, would agree with that. I actually think kids have more clarity than most adults, and often their minds and hearts are. That there's the clarity and the creativity and the imagination and the presence and the joy, and they give so much. There's so many times where that working with kids has been like the best possible gift and medicine for being an adult as well.
I'm Beck, and all of those things as well. How to articulate that in a different way or an additional way. For me, the word vitality comes to the front of my mind. It's all of those things of the vitality of and this of their openness and sharing. Not having the imagination. Just that rawness of imagination, which is so vital and beautiful, and that energy of children and amazingness. It is such a gift.
I'm Leslie. Hi, and I would say it's because it's important work. It's important, and also that they deserve to work with it. Like if they're not. They are humans, and we don't suddenly become human when you're an adult. And so there's this whole that they are citizens and they deserve and have rights to be participating. Yeah.
Can you hear Alex?
Yeah, I'm just turning on my headphones just because the speaker on my computer's not the best quality. So that's so much better.
Hi, I'm Amy, and following on from what everybody else has said, and particularly what Leslie said, I think it's really vital work to be part of the process of facilitating children to access the skills and the knowledge that we get to have as adults. So we're kind of championing their experience, and that feels like really worthy, awesome work. And we get a lot back from that, but like Leslie said, they really deserve to have people sharing their skills and the access that adults have to things, and bringing the kids into that space where they can learn and utilize the things that we get to do as adults. I don't know if I've expressed that well, but
I think we have a nice sort of cumulative conversation here. Yeah, all of that, and I kind of feel I come at it maybe from a slightly more selfish need, because it's in me, which is a belief in social justice, and children are a very large and disparate group who quite clearly, through the history of time, have not been recognised as full citizens until they reach adulthood, and progressively in recent times have acknowledged that that's a mistake, because key important developmental, the process starts very, very young, and we're always going back and back and back and realising how young, and therefore it is at our peril that we ignore the voices of children and deny them a full participation as citizens, because it impacts negatively, if we ignore them, on what happens later down the track in the adult world, which they inevitably become. That was very garbled, but hopefully it makes some sense. So I think it's a social justice and all of that around citizenship and being full participants.
So Alex and I worked together for many years at Art Play, and I think a couple of the things I'd say was, one was some of the most powerful times I think we loved was when we always sort of said, you know, don't really care what the kids are doing, but that they were doing something with adults around the table. And there was this great sense of kind of empathy. I suppose that's the other one for me, why we did all that work, that you know, you get 4 people around the table, they're all going to do a portrait differently, but they're all valid. And it was about validating those children within an intergenerational kind of context, I suppose. That's what I felt we did, and that's what I love doing with them, really. They can't do it wrong. I always love that idea of not doing it. Yeah.
And they give permission to adults to do it wrong as well, I think.
Yeah.
When they collaborate together.
Yeah.
What a great collection of thoughts. And I'm sure we all agree. The only thing that I can add to that is that another reason I work with children is because I think they make adults feel guilty about the future, and I think they make us more thoughtful about the future, and they make us stand on our toes a bit better. But all those other things you talked about, brutal honesty, imagination, sense of play, all those things that they can bring out. And aren't we lucky that we get to work with them as artists? I feel lucky anyway. I think it's the best role to have with children. I'm sure many of you have tried teaching or tried other forms, and it just hasn't fit just as well. We get to have something pretty special with kids. All right, so I make shows that go on tour like this, and I also do workshops like this. And my work looks at how children interact with adults in different ways, looking at some of those things, revealing to adults some of their voices. So those things about brutal honesty, thinking about the future, insightfulness, play. You guys can have a look and research me more if you want to know any of that context. But I give you this kind of consideration because it's been a great provocation just for me to think about documentation and reflection and what my processes are, and the way that the show's documentations happen versus how a workshop's documentation happen are quite different for a few different reasons. So it's been really good. So sometimes I'll be talking about the show kind of stuff, and sometimes I'll be talking about workshops as we go through. So there's this, when I did my education degree, they kept talking about Kolb and another guy as well about their reflective practice. And, you know, it's always a circular concept. And I remember at Art Play, we talked about this a bit as well, about you have the doing, you have the reflection, you have kind of the consolidation and the kind of consideration of that reflection or that synthesis, and then you plan it again, and then you do it again. So it's this circular process. But when I sat down and did it myself and came up with my own kind of process, I realized that it broke down a bit, and it wasn't exactly like that one. It was a bit more complex. So there's always this idea that formulates, that then goes into a plan. I always replan. There's the doing, there's the collecting traces and the sort. Then I sit with the information from a whole different lot of points, like feedback and the documentation, the conversations I've had with peers, other people in the work. Then there's the consolidation, the reflection, and then that either takes me off on another tangent to something different, or it'll come back for the plan and the replan. I'll come back to this at the end, but maybe just now have a little think about, spend maybe 5 minutes. There should be some paper there and some pens. And maybe you just want to consider for a moment what your process actually is at the moment. What do you do? Can you draw a diagram? Is it, I imagine it's circular or spiral in some way. Yeah, also, little paper, I think. what you start with. So is it something that looks like this, or is it something a bit more abstract? So let's do 4 minutes on that.
Hi Lee, are you there? Message to Lee.
What do you want to say?
Are you zooming in with us? If you are, can you turn your microphone off when you're not speaking, please? Otherwise, please join.
Here's your message. Okay, it's sent.
Are you still there, Alex?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Great, we've just lost you.
Time to think. Yeah.
You're back, great.
It might have been me because I'm here as well.
Yeah.
Hey, hello.
Just saying, Lee, if you put your mic off, if you're not speaking, then the camera will automatically stay on Alex.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
Welcome.
Yep, welcome.
Hi, Lee.
Hello.
We are recording this as well.
Oh, that's good. Did you record the one before this too?
No, we didn't.
Ah, okay. Got my times confused.
My audio recorded it.
Great.
How are we going there? People. Oh.
I mean, whether I actually do this every time I do a workshop is another question.
Of course. Time permitting.
Project. So
Cool. I'm sensing that you guys are kind of finishing.
Yep.
My little image of you, there's a bit more movement. Does anybody have like anything they want to share about that? Like that they're like, oh, I didn't realize this, or anything to share?
I can certainly see holes,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm not so surprised about, but is a good kind of focus, I think, to look at the holes a bit.
It's a great place to start, right?
Great place to start, yeah.
Are most of them circular or?
I found the spiral really good. I sort of was very influenced by yours and thinking about that circular motion, which always happens, but then that little, when I drew it at the end and it turned into this little kick at the end, which is either the flowing back around into reworking that idea or that kick of something that's taken you somewhere from that. And then it might turn into another, rather than a spiral, just spiraling on itself, a spiral that kind of flows around.
The Celtic spiral that reverses.
Yeah, like Leslie's drawn. Yeah.
Mine sort of goes, it goes around. Can you see that?
No, I'm just going to try and zoom in. Might have to stop the.
Okay.
You'll zoom in the old-fashioned way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Wow. Whoa! Look at that detail. Amazing. I can't read the words, but I can see. Yeah, there's a lot of. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, your brain's great.
Oh.
I kind of went in a much more kind of listy kind of living, but kept revisiting. Like, so I'd kind of go down the list and then go back up again, and then come back down the list, back up again, and then come back down.
You know, looking at mine, I'm reminded, you know the line on a tennis ball?
Oh, yeah.
And if you put all the tennis balls in a pile and you can actually get the line to join up, it kind of reminds me of that. Where it's not, it's like, you know, and you're keeping all the image of keeping all the balls in the air, but that there's actually this interlocking, interlacing idea that flows through.
Yeah, beautiful. Because when we reflect, like, this is like, these drawings are very much like one project, one idea, but actually the reflection consolidates our whole practice, right? And it feeds into everything.
On my one, I immediately, as you would guess, Alex, I'm sure, I went down the two roads of, you know, there's an extremely kind of operational, practical side. How many people, how many materials do I need? What do I, you know, how long is it going to last? All of that stuff on one side, and I actually started doing that first, which is interesting.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, what do we actually want to get out of it? So yes, but I do think that's you know, you can dream and make up the most amazing project, but if it's never going to happen, you've got to have your restraints and your practicalities.
My thing started with people, and their needs and their wants and their reason to connect. They're the first three things. You know?
Yeah, cool. The context in which you're making work, right? Yeah.
So what's the commonality and what's new and what do we need that's different?
I just started with dreaming. That kind of like the kind of, I think for me, for a long time, having faith in the fact that when you're dreaming, you're intuitively doing all of that. You're intuitively kind of connected with what's around you. You're kind of intuitively connected with what you feel, you know, what is needed, what are people wanting. I think in that dreaming.
We work in two ways, don't we? Because I always feel like there's projects that I really want to do that come purely from my experience as an artist and wanting to create work. And then there's also projects where a venue or a presenter comes to me and says, we want to do this indoor installation around this theme. You know, like they come from quite different places, but they've all got their own context and they've all got their own limitations or ideas. And sometimes when you're really lucky, you can put this one in here and you can find ways to pigeon or test those things in there. So I guess unlike Simon, I don't necessarily, well, sometimes I do start with the parameters of it, but I was just thinking about my own, I've got to go back, hang on, let me just work this out. Can you still see the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay, so I realized that walking is actually a really important part of my process in terms of reflecting on other projects and planning. So I've become quite an avid hiker. and that's my time to like unpick thoughts, and how ensuring that I make sure that I have time to walk is really important. So sometimes somebody like that, I'll kind of get approached by somebody, or there'll be a grant up or something, and it's in that walking stage that I kind of understand what I need to do, and so they'll kind of like, I'm not sure, but I kind of like am able to synthesize it down as I walk and kind of come up with an idea. And from there, I'll then kind of think about, that's kind of like the seed of an idea. So might be, I'm just trying to think. So doing a work for a dog festival that I did last time, I was trying to work out a way for children and adults to celebrate dogs in some way, but like all the amazing things that dogs are. So, you know, their playfulness, their joyfulness, but also like that ability for both adults and children to make something together and bond over it in the making. So I ended up doing some sort of clay workshops. And then I'm pretty avid brainstormer. So this little picture down the bottom in the circle was what I started with for this talk. So I like kind of just start doodling and writing and do arrows around and kind of just get the thoughts down. But as well as writing, I really love talking. And I think this is what Christy was saying before as well with Luke, is like having those people, those peers where you can run ideas past, and you do it for them and they do it for you. And sometimes it's not even my artist friends. My poor housemates had to deal with it a lot. Me just talking ideas out. Like they got a lot of, they started having very firm opinions about things. But that process of talking I find really important as well. And I guess it's all about your own style of learning and consolidating. But the talking part's really important for me. And then that's when I get to the scheduling bit, which is when I go, oh, how much time have I got? How many materials have I got? What's my budget? How am I going to achieve this in an hour and a half? Is this a drop-in workshop? Is it a 2-hour workshop? What does it look like? And I start looking at the more concrete. So usually by the talking stage, I'll get it into kind of like a very simple synthesis of what I'm trying to explore. So whether that's about connecting adults and children over dogs through a creative process, and it's about the intergenerational connection, and it's about them feeling like the adults particularly having permission to play with their child in an interesting way. So it might be something like that, but it's usually at that talking stage that I'm able to articulate it and synthesize it right down. Before I get to the scheduling part. And I think with the scheduling part, I kind of really look at what I need to do and for who. So sometimes I'll be really loose. So the one on the left is a pretty loose, like nobody would understand what that was about. That's a workshop that, bits of workshops that I've run before. I've done many times, but I'm just like adapting it to the time frame that I have and the context and what I want to explore. To then plan, that's the one on the right, is about, I did some workshops that I needed to train new artists and facilitators to do. So then the plan for them to hand over. So I think it's about, you know, finding who are you planning for? Do you need to write a big detailed thing, or is it just about notes for you that you can then understand? And there's often a bit of time between my initial plan and my initial sketch. It's usually a day or two, and then I'll come back and rework it. So I always replan everything and adapt it and improve it before I even do the doing. This is me. So this is another, so there should be another piece of paper. So this is just an opportunity to consider, how do you plan? What's your process? And how do you record your ideas? Like I know Simon does a lot of drawing. I know, you know, Christy was saying, I know people that just put all of their ideas into voice memos and then come back and listen to them. Maybe it's all in your brain because you've got to, you know, that you can do that. But do you want to just spend a couple of minutes thinking about that? How you plan?
You can use it.
Flick, do you have anything interesting that came up then, or anything you want to share?
I don't know if it's that interesting, but it's kind of similar to what you were talking about. I mean, voice memos, I use a lot of recording on my phone, especially if I'm on the fly. I just need to I need to talk, like when you were saying that you need to talk, I definitely need to talk. And I think there's times in my life where I have people I can talk through things, and then other times when I really don't. And it's trying to work out how to do that. I have come across someone recently who said they do a lot of walking and talking to themselves at the same time, like they have vocal conversations discussing quite lengthy topics with themselves, power walking around the bush and along the beach and stuff, and they get a lot out of that, and I quite liked hearing that. But yeah, voice memos and just writing and mind mapping, and then reflecting, and then kind of going back through that, and then going back to mind mapping again, and then journaling, and like kind of
just a little circle before you actually get to the doing.
Yeah, and I think that can, even with my my kind of the little plan we did before, I think I was a bit like that as well, is that it sort of goes around like accumulating, reflecting, talking, digesting, accumulating a bit more, and it kind of like before actually implementing things, it sort of can go around quite a few times, and it's sort of piecing bits together and then digest and then bounce that, and then so it's not like super clear step by step. It kind of sometimes bounces back to similar things. And some things will appear on a mind map or a list a number of times in different ways, kind of like
Do you just draw your mind maps, or do you
words mostly, and bits of
but by
pictures
hand? You don't use software?
No, I've tried doing some things on apps digitally, but I haven't. If I had a tablet, maybe, and I could do it a little bit more, still kind of drawy, free, like with a bit more freehand, it might help. But you know, I come back to big. I actually need really big bits of paper.
Right.
Like I can't get big enough, basically. Like the bigger bit of paper, the more comfortable I feel. Like kind of whole walls sometimes, and like lots of space. I just take up so much space.
That's really interesting because I've really kind of got the opposite, where I actually really love to do it in a book because I can like draw on one page and then flip it. It's like, okay, I can start a new idea and flip it, or I can continue the conversation and flip it, or I can like go back to that first page. And I can, it really helps me kind of, I totally love the mind mapping thing as well, but I like to be able to just flip and go black, black.
That's cool.
Just gets it out.
I like a smaller book because you can carry it with you. I've got loads of them, and I just take them out of the cover and they're all in a row. And it's my life in all my different parts of my life are all in these books. And so I'm thinking I might be sitting somewhere where, you know, thinking about the planning that I'm doing, and I'm actually supposed to think about something else at the time, but it's here. So I can just go back and, all right, that's right.
I have to say, one of the things I do feel guilty about is I go to Officeworks and I buy those 30-cent or 18-cent little exercise books. Like I've got one of them today. And I just buy. Just look at the tree.
But at least it doesn't have plastic.
It doesn't. That's very true. That's very true. Anyway, but I do that too, Leslie. Like these little, just lots of little.
So do you go back? How often do you go back through them? Because that's what I was like. Even doing this, I was like, there's lots of voice memos that I haven't listened to, and there's so many journals. And every now and then, like, you know, sometimes years later, I'll go, I did that workshop and I wrote all that stuff down. You know, but sometimes there's like all these things. Just got to make sure you put the date on the front of it, like this is August or whatever. This is February too.
And I started as a
my perspective. My perspective on your point, Flick, is that a lot of the time I'm doing just to make sense of it. It's not to look back at it. It's to get the thoughts straight and trusting that the important stuff is retained, and that's what it's the process of doing, not the process of recording necessarily.
But there's times when I think, like, just in writing this down, I was like, there's some like really good bits of information and things I've mind mapped out that would be really useful for me right now. So it was a good prompt to go, I'm going to go back through some of those things that I've had these epiphanies about, or ideas that I want to go back to. I just don't.
Yeah, actually, I have to say another thing that came up for me, and it has come up since the last project, is conversations with peers but emailing. And so sometimes I find if I'm emailing a conversation or even Facebook messaging or even texting, what I'll do is just take a note, okay, that was between, you know, that person, and then I can go back into the email and just put in that person's name, and I've got that information there. I can cut and paste it and put it in a Word document and then put it in a file, or I can, because they happen quite spontaneously, those conversations, but if I can get them into a mode, where even Slack, where it's actually a mode that's online, then I can go back to and cut and paste and reintroduce later.
I'm doing a little whiteboard, might guess, Alex. Just
yes, I saw a pen.
One of the objectives of the whole of this program, in some ways, is to produce some online resources of some kind for people to use. And that could be just simply lists of what people use. You know, that might be all it is, and it would go with this. So I'm just going to try and capture some of those things. The thing I was going to say on my observation on this is how, and it comes up from this conversation, is the difference between, well, I think I need to tease apart planning, documentation, and evaluation. That's one. But some things are very much for you, and some are for other people. So I put down, I use drawing, but then I'll actually, if I need to share that information, I'm going to have to put it in a Word table or an Excel sheet or something so that somebody else gets it. And your two good examples of that. You know, if you gave me that first sheet, I'd go, what you talking about? You know, whereas the next one, people would have a set of language that they know.
It's a translation process of your ideas. At the moment, I've just been working on a big project where all the planning, I'm actually documenting the planning because it is about sharing with other people. And it's so much about the clarity of the communication in that document, in the planning process, that the documenting the planning. So different to my scribbles and scrawls. My scribbles and scrawls are spatial and colour-based, and it's about the piece of paper and when it happened, which is why I like the sequence, the time-based. So I need to know when I had that conversation in my order of life, sort of thing. But my planning to present to other people is like the document.
Yeah. We've allowed a bit of time this afternoon to do a bit more sharing of how we do this. So, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Very similar to Leslie. I really need the book to be with me. That's the most important thing, that I can have it at any time that something happens, because it does seem to happen in a more in an unscheduled and organised fashion. When other things happen.
It's while other things are happening. It's almost like your brain's, part of your brain disengaged, and there's this bubbling happening, and it's able to bubble.
Actually, in mine, I wrote about often, because I've got a little office in my garden, and I'm a pretty obsessive gardener, and I've just surrendered to the thing recently where I'll do a bit of work and then I'll go and pull some weeds out or something. And it's actually, I've just realised it's actually just part of, it's a flow for me. And sometimes in pulling a couple of weeds out, I'll have that space to provide for the idea. And it might just be a time. It's like when you go and make a cup of tea.
I was going to say, I make so many cups of tea.
Yeah.
And not half the time I get up and boil the kettle, and by the time then I go back and do some work, and I've forgotten that I boiled the kettle, but it's the act of getting up.
Yeah, and it's allowing that flow. It's movement. Movement.
Yeah, I love that though, isn't it? That your best ideas come when you're not thinking about it, and it's through doing. I think it's always like these meditative, repetitive practices that you have in your life that allow you to not think about it, and that's when the ideas come. Or it's like about the ideas settling, and that reveals something. It kind of pops up or synthesizes, or the clarity comes. And I think, I mean, you know, making time for that and valuing that time, I think, is one of my challenges. I mean, we live in a world of busy, produce, making sure that there's time, you cultivate time to do that.
This was
obviously.
One of Christie's comments, you know, right at the beginning was around making space within the budget for that time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Alex and I introduced at ArTELIER, which was successful, I think, was with every grant application that came in, if they didn't allow, what was it, 10% of the time, the planning budget, it wasn't even going to be looked at, was it? We sort of were very firm about this, that people had to build in just time when they were just pulling the weeds and thinking.
Yeah. And I remember you, Simon, like when even as an employee of ArtPlay saying, take the morning off and go look at art, or take the morning off and go for a walk, you know, like there was, you did say that sometimes. You're like, I remember at the conference, you were like, you're overloading, go look at some art, go to the art gallery, you need some time to process. You know, and
I built through it.
I just don't see.
I beat myself up for those processes, and then you're like, that's part of the process. It's okay.
And it feels so wonderful. Like fresh air.
So have you adopted that now, Alex?
I can't say that I pay myself for that stuff, but I make sure I have time for it. I think I also have this story. I think it was an artist. She was a writer. She was at Bundanon or up in the Blue Mountains for like a month, and she spent the whole time walking. She didn't do any writing. And the residency was pointing out, so after she'd done this month of walking and thinking, she then went on to write an award-winning book, but it was once the residency had finished, and how important it is to have residencies that allow time for thinking, that don't have you don't need to deliver an outcome at the end of it, which I think is another like seed that I think about, like valuing that time.
One of the first artists here did that. She took about 6 days of going to Mona, going to Mona Foma, walking around the land, and on the day before she left, on the morning before she left, she took some photographs, and that was the work. But that's a lot to do with giving yourself permission to do that.
Exactly. It's about giving yourself permission.
But it's also, I think, understanding process. I think one of that deep diving, I just love that expression, like deep diving, because I feel like there's something to be valuable and rich and moving and affecting. It has to be a deep dive, and I don't think there's any other way apart from, I don't know, this is just me, like I just think we just need those absent spaces like sleeping, or as you're saying, repetitive processes that allow for that.
In a sense, that's what our practice
Yeah.
is, isn't it? And if we, Alex, you've been doing your work for many years, and a lot of this planning, I'm assuming, you're at that deeper level quite quickly in your planning, because you're so aware of your everyday practice that a lot of things are going to work and know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there's always challenges and new adventures to be had that stop me from going there immediately, but you do learn your way, right? And you do learn your methods. And sometimes you think, like, you do all this planning, and then quite often I'll be like, oh, look, I've learned that problematic problem again. Like, particularly in workshops when things happen and you're like, oh, I forgot about this situation. I've seen this before and I had a solution, but I didn't implement it, like those, it's not perfect and you're always adapting and remembering.
One of the things I wrote on my first sheet you asked is about how do we make sure we can tweak as we go along. That's in a way one of the parts of the planning is to know that it's not going to be all planned.
Well, because it's about scaffolding. If you understand where you're coming from and where you're heading to, and you understand the scaffolding that's needed, but you're not filling in all the details, you're just creating the scaffolding.
Yeah, and for me, but even as a facilitator, my feeling is like I'd rather be super planned. If I feel super planned, then it's easier for me to drop the plan. And go somewhere where the interest is, right? But my personality requires me to feel really planned and know what's going to happen so that then I can drop it.
Yeah. Our last provocation talked about designing rather than planning, and that his idea was that non-linear and planning, we immediately have this linear kind of thought pattern around it, whereas designing, you're thinking about all the elements, but you're not necessarily putting them into a linear process. So then you can pull on them when you need them.
And it allows it to be more emergent.
Cool. Yeah, it's really an amazing articulation. Oh, David.
Yeah. I think a lot of my planning process comes from a theatre background though, and the dramaturgical structure of a good experience, and what you need at the beginning, what you need to put in place to get people to the right journey that you want them to go on. Yeah, so I think that's kind of where I've come from in that journey rather than from the design area, another perspective.
Saving a creature.
Was it?
We've got in Castle
In distress. Those awful
Portuguese.
Oh, the millipedes. Sorry, I vacuumed them up. Sorry, it's just creature in distress.
Oh, fine. He's not really in distress. He's now outside. He's fine.
He's probably going to be more distressed now he's been thrown out of his home place. Okay, we're settled back, Alex.
Carry on.
That was funny. Okay, so documentation. This is an interesting one, and it's a huge one, and I know you're going to talk about it more, but I guess my provocation is what is recorded during the doing, and then who is it for? So, So when I talk about documentation, I talk about what's happening during the event, right? So I've separated documentation and feedback. I know some people would put them together, but the documentation is the act of it happening. So to start us off, if I can work this out, I've written some notes somewhere. No, go away. So documentation might be for you. It might be for funding and grants. It might be for future pitches to other venues. It might be for those involved, so the parents and children. It might be for the venue presenter you have, or it might be for promotion. Oh, where have you gone? So those are the kind of the context that I think about in terms of who's it for and why am I doing it? Because again, the documentation I do for myself is very different to what I might provide a presenter or what I might provide for marketing. And I think there's a lot of expectation on artists to provide for all of those. Yeah. And I don't think any one documentation is going to work for all of those. So I thought I'd show you some examples of some of the documentation I've done for different projects that might just kind of give you like an idea of kind of the different ways that I do it, and then we can have another conversation about kind of ways that you guys do it. So, so this is a show one. So this is a work, the Future Postal Service, that it's a work that goes on tour, and we've sold work off this video. I asked for a video that just explained the work and basically sold it to presenters. So I'll show it to you and we can have a little chat about it.
Are you sharing screen?
Oh, is that not working for you?
No.
No. Sorry, I'm clicking too many things at once.
That's it. Back.
Yeah, that's it. Great. Let's go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for picking that up. Go.
We're not getting sound, Alex.
Yeah, we need the sound.
Yeah. Alex?
Yeah.
We're not getting sound. We're not getting any sound.
Oh, not getting any sound.
No.
Try again.
Try again, or maybe we'll just skip it. Does that work?
This installation was made to empower children. This is achieved by inviting children to activate the space and self-navigating it, but also through gifting to people they don't know. For adults, it's about having a moment with a child, about finding time to listen, and ultimately seeding in them a sense of responsibility to the future generation. Welcome to the Future Postal Survey. This postal service is very special because only children like you can be posted. And it's fun because we deliver to classes by out there that we don't know. We've got these postcards and you'll get a stamp up here when you're finished. On this side, you will draw a right. It says thank you for. Now, can you think about anything that you might thank adults for? Are you ready to be a future postman? Ready.
Yeah.
seriously. Enjoy all your class. Thank you.
Wouldn't it be nice to have money to do that kind of thing for all those that we have?
It's yeah.
Put your mic back on, Alex. Better.
That better?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, cool. So, you know, that's an example of considering pitches. Like, it's a real thing within the theatre industry of having to get up on a stage and do a 10-minute pitch, and a 3-minute video is what's perfect for those situations, and it's also great for funding applications. But whether that's good for, like, I'm not sure. I learned a lot from that documentation. I learned how to explain it to other people, the work, is what that purpose is for. And it was somebody who was, you know, a documentation, like a photographer, a videographer, who was able to stand outside of the process and document it. And also, credit to her, she has a really good understanding of capturing the moments of interaction between adults and children, and really captured the essence of the work. Not all videos I've done are as good as that, and I think finding somebody who really understands your work and your essence is really important. Like, I'm just going through the documentation, like trying to get a video for a work I've just done called Everyday Superhero, and it's with a new videographer, and the outcome is just completely not something that can sell the work, and we're having to go back, and I'm trying to work out how to explain what I need and what that's like, and how, yeah, so like trying to get that language and that person to understand is really challenging, because also now the event's over, we've got all this footage, but I don't, you know, how do we negotiate that, and how do we articulate what we need? Where, you know, Sarah was amazing and she understood my practice and had done a lot of interactive work, so I just got it. Whereas now I'm in Perth, there's not as many works like mine, there's not like photographers and videographers that have worked with children a lot. It's a whole different thing, and I've just spent all this money on this person and we've got something that's not that great. So I think it's also understanding how amazing those people are when they're working really well, and how a good documenter as well is not invasive on the work. They're able to step outside and kind of be invisible and document well.
Can I ask a question with that?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I think that raises a really interesting thing about documentation. It depends on the purpose of it, because the purpose of documenting and recording what you're doing might be useful for your own planning and self-reflection. It may not be, particularly if there are some things that didn't go well, may not be what you want for promoting the work or pitching the work. That's quite a different thing, because you want to present all the positive stuff. So it's kind of, where do you bring in that, the learning stuff that documentation can give you as well, which may not be about a really super positive outcome, might be about things that didn't go well and that, but you've learnt from.
Yeah, look, in that video, I think the voiceover does a lot as well. That I provide at the beginning, and some of those articulations can be like that. That's how, probably where I would start in terms of the document, like how you would reveal the process or the challenges in the documentation. But again, is that something that you're wanting to pitch to somebody, or is that about an acquittal? How do you do that? That work also,
I guess, yeah, exactly. It's just what is the purpose?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to know. You know, you might have one purpose of getting that videographer in there to do it, but like you were talking before, it may not end up revealing what you wanted from the beginning. So it's very hard in terms of planning your money and
but also
else,
don't underestimate the power of a good edit. Like in that video, I remember I was freaking out because it was the one day it was really, really rainy and there weren't that many audience members around, you know, but she managed to make it work and still provide that joyous, sunny disposition within it, even though it was really, really rainy. And and I was worried about what the documentation would look like.
Yeah, I noticed the rain. It did look very rainy.
It was very rainy, very Melbourne day. So I'm just going to, so then in that same work, there's all these postcards that go out. And
Hold on,
I think
Alex.
this is something that I do a lot in my work.
Question on last work.
Oh, yes, please.
I'm a photographer and videographer, and I'm really interested to find out what you consider appropriate expense for that work, and how, and I'm guessing that it's also really important to put that in your grant application if that's how you're facilitating it. Yeah, so that's my question. And we can do it later if
how much I would budget. Yeah, so I budget $1,500 at least for a video.
Of how much?
Also like
time?
$1,500 for a 3-minute video.
3 minute. And how much shoot time would you expect for that? Or would that just be rolled in whatever needs to be done?
Rolled in.
Yeah. Often I'll budget that, but then I'll ask for a quote. And so, for example, with this person that we're doing for Everyday Superhero, we've got this kind of issue with, we've taken money out of the contingency because he's spent a lot of time already doing stuff. And we have money in the contingency, so we're paying him more to do a re-edit. I mean, that's a pretty fortunate place to be. I reckon, to be honest with you, if there wasn't money in the contingency, I would have gone into like our rainy day fund to do it, because it's so important to get a good video at the end of these things. But it is a really difficult thing about the respect of the videographer's time, and how some projects take longer than expected.
And on that note, it can be tricky to find out from a client exactly what they are envisaging. And so how do you go about checking that everybody's on the same page for the desired outcome as the client?
Yeah. So I think in this instance, what happened was, I think I over articulated what I wanted. So I gave him a list of moments that I'd really like to be touched on. I gave him that video to say I want something like this. I gave him all of this kind of stuff, and actually his creativity got stifled in that process. And then I think he panicked a little bit with the amount of footage he got. He had issues with the recording, and it's now
a big monster.
Yeah, we're trying to get him back into the creative so that he can use his own skills in it. So my producer was like, "You've overdone it. Like, you've got to pull back and let him do his job. You've over asked, and he's stressed with the things he's got to achieve rather than doing the thing." So I'm learning as well about how do we do that.
An observation on that I'd throw in from actually just documenting these sessions that we're doing. I started doing them just on my iPad, very quick, doing them as we went along, working in iMovie, and at the end of the day, we'd have somebody there doing a voiceover on a quick, dirty video. So we just invested in a video camera, and I videoed the last session, and it's still sitting on the computer because I haven't yet attacked it, because it does seem like a beast.
Yeah.
Again, I shot too much. It's too high quality.
Suddenly
so,
invest more.
Yeah.
It becomes too hard.
I think the other thing I was going to say on this one, it's a big discussion, but from sitting on panels, sometimes now I think you look at somebody's grant and you can think they can make a great video. You know, I wonder how good the project is.
Yeah.
So I think there's something about dirty and honest and with integrity that is more valuable often. And, you know, just an organization that can make a good video, because you can just buy that, basically.
I was going to say that. I also noticed the rain, and I thought straight away, that's really interesting, because it's telling a really important story that this project works in the face of adversity, such as the weather adversity. So straight away for me, it triggered, you know, I was seeing it through that eye of the pitch. You know, this is one that will work in all weathers, literally. That's the best pageant.
I think also, Simon, what is really interesting is who you're actually sharing that video with, again, who you're pitching to, because if some clients will just see something really schmick and go, "Oh, this is great."
Yeah, they will.
But so, like, it depends at what creative level you're pitching to, whereas, as you're saying, the funding body is really looking for substance. So it's a
Although
Yeah.
are one of the most sort of seductive ways of selling a project.
Yes.
No doubt about that.
undoubtedly, yeah.
From my
And also, like, none of us are selling a project that's just with a video. There's always a conversation that goes around these things, and there's extra things that happen, but it's more like the hook, right? It's the hook to get that conversation to happen quite often.
There's a difference between a pitch of an existing project that's actually had a run and then pitching an idea, if you like, or something that's had a creative development, and then you're going for the next stage, and the video of the creative development is atrocious. I'm thinking of grant applications where you go, no, really? Is that what they've got, you know? So, I don't know, I think they would have been better without.
Maybe.
Yeah.
You were wanting to.
I was just going to say it's totally a fine line between giving too little and too much. And I think that depends on the person that you're working with and the creator. Because sometimes it's really great to have a really, really tight brief. Because then you can shoot exactly to that brief. Again, everybody tells the story differently, and when you've obviously employed somebody, you've looked at their work before, and you've appreciated how they've told the story, and you've gone, I like the way that looks, I like the way that they see the world. And somehow in that translation between your telling about your project and them receiving that information, they haven't been able to find their creativity within the brief. So that's a really interesting dynamic that obviously it's hard to know.
I think I'm struck by the richness of the conversation that comes out of you sharing the challenges and the difficulties. And something you said at the beginning, obviously you talked about that there are so many multiple purposes, but something that had one purpose, actually you've turned into a tool for a different purpose. You've turned this, what was supposed to be the pitch video, has become clearly a tool for major self-reflection, which is really interesting. Maybe finding the positives in the negatives is part of it.
And working on the process, sort of, you'll now have a greater understanding of how that might play out. And I think personality is a really big part of it. And it's interesting that you have a producer, but the producer wasn't the conduit between you and the videographer, and that might also be a good way to allay that kind of situation, because really the producer
I think she stepped in because she's like, okay, I need to control this. But also it's like with any new relationship, right, that you're kind of a new creative relationship, it takes a bit of time, and unfortunately the poor videographer's had to step in at the end and deliver something when he doesn't really know me. I'm stressed delivering this premiere project, giving information, you know, like I can see how it's all happened, and thankfully we have time and we have money to resolve it. But yeah, like it you know, and I think this is, I think it's also really interesting. Like in Melbourne, I had all those contacts and everything set up, and then to move to Perth, you realise that kind of depth of knowledge, that depth of understanding isn't necessarily there because the work is really different. And there's not as many people here, and I'm sure that's the same in some Simon and Victoria that you found moving as well. It takes time to build those relationships, and it takes time, you know, and that's, you find joy, and you also find, like, you know, it's frustration as well, like, oh man, it was easier back there, but you know, but that's why we've moved, and you know, to share and cross-pollinate and do all those great things. Okay, moving on. So another thing that I really love to do with children is to document what they make. So this is something that I do in a lot of projects, because a lot of them are kind of modular projects. So for Future Postal Service, same project. Sometimes we take photographs of all of the postcards that are going through, so that then at the end we can sit down and have a look at them and reflect as a team about what they're writing about and what they're discussing, and making sure that we're hitting the right points for the conversation section of the work for the children to write their thank you notes. And that, for me, the comparison of different things is really interesting. Now, we'll see whether this works. Is this opening? Can you see? web page?
No,
Can you see a web page?
PowerPoint.
we're looking at your
See.
power. Yeah.
It's still PowerPoint. Okay, let's see.
Slides.
Yeah, here we go. So this is a project that also looks at the traces. Can you now see a website?
Yeah.
I do this, yeah. So I've been doing a project for a while that's called "What Does the World Need to Hear?" and it asks children. It's a workshop, but I've done it now in some different countries, and the comparison of them has become its own little project. So often when I'm in a new place, so let's look at the Singapore ones, they're the most recent ones. I'll sort of show the Australian children's answers and then compare them to the answers that I'm receiving in a new country to be able to compare the cultural differences between these answers. So this is a pretty simple way of a documentation process that I think allows people to access it in a different way, but also allows me to reflect on what's happening after the event. So it's a kind of crucial form of feedback for me. And it can be done during the actual workshop, which is really efficient. Okay.
So there, the documentation is kind of turning into a whole new work of its own.
It's turning into a whole new work of its own, exactly. And it's a way, because I guess my practice is also about sharing, like everything's about sharing what the children do, sharing it with people they don't know. But online has provided a way, a really cost-effective and simple DIY way of sharing. So this is a workshop project, so it's not like big budgets, it's not like I have money for people to make a video for it, but I enjoy through my reflection process and as part of it to document all of those, do a batch edit and upload them onto the website and sometimes get them translated, whatever needs to be done. But there's a gallery aspect to it, I guess. And then also with this project, another form of documentation that's come about is the hashtags. So this is through Instagram. So we have a hashtag Future Postal Service on the actual postcard. And through that, I then see what the adults, how they're responding to it, which it's not the best form of way of dealing with things because I can become very addicted to try and see where people are doing it. And if we're in an area that's not really into Instagram, it can feel pretty deflating. But we have had some really beautiful moments and responses from people that way. And that's a way of outsourcing some of the documentation. And then I really like, so the House of Muchness is run by Alex in Melbourne, and I really love her Instagram feed. I think she's got a really beautiful way. She always documents like a minute or 30 seconds of the workshop she does with the children. And from my observation of what she's doing, she's kind of making herself a rule that she'll take 30 seconds of footage from every workshop and then sharing that online. And so with that, she's kind of got this like journey of those artists, of those children's journey through her workshop. She generally does workshops, like a term of workshops, and the kids come back every week. And I really like, I just think it's a really effective way of collating stuff in a really simple way and achievable with no budget and no time, and good for her and good for her publicity. And on that, she also sometimes gives the camera to a child. So sometimes a child in the workshop does the documentation of 30 seconds. And I think that's also a really effective and efficient way of doing things, that you can think about how children, who else is in the room to do that documentation or assist. Is it a parent? Is it a child? Is it a camera, time lapse? What are those other free ways that we can do documentation?
I think the other thing about this one is that it describes the process of our working ongoing. So I think if you're on a panel, an organisation, I think it's really good to look up and see what they're up to, rather than single video.
Yeah.
You could have been done
totally.
for all we know.
Yeah.
You know, who knows?
Yeah.
And you can edit the very best for the video. Whereas this, it shows an ongoing, and it's a bit warts and all, you know.
It's a depth.
Yeah. And it's warts and all. Some are good, some you look at and think, that didn't quite work. But never mind, it's there anyway. Because once it's up on and really, that's it. It's building a body of work.
And they're really just moments. They're not.
That's right.
They're quite abstract when you look at them. You're like, I have no idea what's going on, but it's kind of like you can see young people performing and doing something interesting, and that's enough. It probably means more to her, but from an outside perspective, I think it's really successful for her. The way she works as well.
And it was the children's party, part of last 10 days on the island. Ben and Alex brought it over, so.
Yeah.
And is that in terms of like the ethics of permissions and stuff? I guess she has that permission from the children to share that.
Well, how did that work with you out in the street there? Did you have to get
out on the street? Yeah, so we got signed. So as parents were dropping their children off, we got permission to sign off, and we only filmed those that we had permission for. Yeah. Yeah, and then the general public are allowed to be filmed for things.
Yeah.
We don't need permission from them.
It's amazing.
But maybe this is an opportunity just to think about, like, are there any, oh look, I've written some questions. So how can you use others? How can you use technology? And how can you use the art itself? Are my questions. So does anybody have any examples that they've seen, or, oh, look at the time.
You're doing?
We're getting to the end. I'm doing really badly on the time. Haven't even got to feedback. So
well,
I might.
We're enjoying it.
You okay if I go a bit over? Is that all right? Like, is that going to muck?
Yeah, we're just going
to.
You can go 10 or 15.
You're just going to what, so?
Go 10 or 15 over, no problem.
Right. Okay. I might move on from this because I think feedback's really important, and it's something that I'm really interested in because I don't always, you can only learn so much from observing children, I think, and you can only have your eyes on so many things going on in the room. So I like to think a lot about feedback. So there's my response and my reflection, but there's also the participants, the incidental observer, and the active observer. So that might be a peer or a parent or a researcher. And I do each of them differently. So, and I think it's also, I've actually had to capture feedback and not drown. So I have been, I can get too much feedback.
You go back one.
From people.
You just go back.
Go back one.
Incidental
Just back one.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to get
This one.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I guess this is very particular to my work because there's a few levels of audience. So there's the children that are working in it, and then there's the parents who are maybe observing or maybe they're in on the workshop, and then there's the general public who are interacting. That's really hard to get feedback from if you're doing random acts of kindness. So this is kind of the way that I prefer to get it. So from peers, I much prefer to have a conversation with them. So that's either a phone call or a coffee or some really specific questions in an email. Because I need to go deeper and I need to respond and keep questioning what they're asking is what I found. And I also just like to hear their initial response. So to have an initial response before I ask questions is really important to me. Then, so we'll talk about this a bit more, but it's really interesting to think about how we get feedback from children, from their, how we elicit things other than, oh, it was really great, and how different children need different ways of communicating their feedback. So whether, sometimes time and, you say one thing that you liked and one thing you didn't like around in the circle, and quite often kids always just say what they like. You don't hear what didn't work. To then in small groups with an artist, so 2 or 3, and you can kind of dig a bit deeper, or sometimes I get them to draw kind of something and then we have a chat about it. And somebody also introduced this idea of gamifying it, so like turning it into a board game, and then you have different questions that you ask when they get there, so as a way of getting them engaged and doing something rather than just talking to you, which was quite clever. And I haven't explored more, but just kind of suggest that there are other ways to do it that could be super successful. And then the carers and guardians. So I think it's really, I find it quite challenging for them to separate their own experience from their child's experience. So, because they'll quite often tell me what their child was doing rather than their own experience, having to be really explicit in asking for that difference in feedback. And for them, I've found SurveyMonkey and emails are pretty good a few days afterwards, once the experience is settled, as a way of asking those questions. So has anybody got any ideas about what they've found the best way to get feedback from children? Any gems? Room?
We didn't do it, but I bought something today, which was something that happened in the workshop, which was a way of offering questions on little boards, and that kind of broke it down for children to respond in a particular way. So the question was, they were separated into questions. Something I think is interesting. So it goes like that. Something nobody else noticed. So if you're having a conversation,
that's a good one.
And there are ideas coming out, and then what's something that you think nobody else noticed?
You really want to find that thing, wouldn't you? That nobody else noticed.
Yeah, and so it's gamifying it a bit and saying, I wonder, and then they can finish that, and then just that simple one. Yeah, so it's kind of gamifying.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
With Polyglot, we used to have just like pens and paper on the exit, and often, more often than what you would think, people would, because they've had such an amazing time in the space, or for We Built the City or Tangle or whatever it was, and they'd often take the time to sit and draw, and it was also like kind of digesting the experience, I think, as well, like kind of come out of space. And and some of the things that you get as feedback from it was always the difference between what the parents and their children would do would be quite different things. But the drawing seemed really cool for kids to be able to draw a response. I noticed that happening a lot, more than words.
I'd like to add to that and say that very often in the small-scale micro-publishing workshops, say in a festival setting, that the books that the children create and publish that are the focus of the workshop absolutely double beautifully as the feedback. Not always, but often you can just tell a lot when you look back at the books. I've noticed over the years that the conversations that the artists or parents or whoever looking perhaps at the end of a workshop reading back, and they provide a trigger for people to then say more about, oh yeah, I remember she was doing X, Y, Z. But actually the books themselves often tell us, you could see the child. Or you could see the child was thinking, heck, I don't want to use any collage materials. How am I going to get out of this one? And, there's just a lot of information.
And there's something to be said about having that tangible thing to talk about at the end, which is so challenging in performance works.
Yeah.
Because you sit around and you're like, what was the experience like? And you can see their brain go, a bit overwhelmed from the beginning to the end. So like having that drawing to then talk to can really help.
Yeah, I was thinking
Yeah.
of very sort of traditional ones, if you like, in practical classes where there's no paper, there's no pens, and the exit ticket thing where you get them to say something as they're exiting, but then there's a queue and they're all listening to each other. So I've actually observed, it wasn't me teaching, I was watching somebody else working, where the last thing was to lie down on the floor, and they're in a circle, but they're lying on the floor with their heads outwards, and they could speak anonymously because they were just looking at the ceiling. They couldn't see what else was speaking, and that was much more. There were many more opportunities for the young people to speak honestly and to give opinions because they couldn't see who was speaking. But it was from a movement workshop, so they were, they were already lying on the, it just was a natural.
That sort of feedback.
It would end up lying on the floor.
Yeah.
One thing that we had happened, and I don't even know if Amy knows this, but Hobart's really, really small. And so we'd done this workshop. I don't know whether you know this. And I was talking to, I just randomly called a friend that night, and it was another artist, and just to have a chat and catch up. And one of the first things she said to me is, because I said, how was your day? And she kind of went, blah, blah, blah. And then she went, actually, I know how your day was. I was like, really? What? And she said, well, we were at the Oval today with the dogs, and this girl came running over to pat the dog, and she said to this friend of mine, I was just in this workshop today, and we did this amazing thing. We were listening to blah, 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 blah. And she did, and this friend of mine just kind of went, oh, lovely. Kind of like, she did just this spontaneous bubbling of what had happened, and somehow it kind of got...
And that's
collected in the
and it's so challenging, isn't it? Because it's quite often after the workshop that the real epiphanies come that you're not privy to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's really challenging because also, like, I'm somebody as well that needs a bit of time to then go and reflect. And we can do that with adults. I think, like, we can send out an email, we can do that, but we can't necessarily do that with kids. And if we get that feedback, it's through the lens of an adult. Feeding back to us.
I think that's something that is really interesting. Is there a way of working into actually somehow re-asking the children or the young people a month later? And what would the question be? Like, has anything happened differently since you did or what questions could you ask
the kids later? Actually do remember, that sometimes where you don't think, like years later where a kid will mention this particular thing and you're like, whoa, that actually did go right in there.
I remember a classic example of that many years ago was where we built into the project time to go back a month later, and we spoke to the principal and the class teacher. And one of the questions was, have you noticed any impact since the project finished? Obviously, it was related to publishing and storytelling and making books. And they just sort of went, no. So our hearts sank, and then we went on to the next. And then we went on to the next question, and then a couple of minutes later, the class teacher just interrupted right through what we were saying, whoever was speaking, and just said, "Oh, Barbara, the principal, did I tell you about little so and so came in the other day with a book he'd made at home?" And of course, we're going, And I say, was little so-and-so part of our project? Oh, no, he wasn't part of the project. But he went on to say, the teacher, but there's some girls who are part of the project, and we have half an hour a week when the children are allowed to choose what to do. I'll just let that settle in. And in that half an hour week, the little girls were making books. And little so-and-so, who was not part of the project, learnt from the little girls how to make a book, went home, made a book with his family, and then brought it back into school. But of course there was no impact. And, how would little so-and-so be in terms of, where's he positioned in the class with his literacy learning? Oh, no, he's, he can't read, he can't do anything, totally deficit child, poor family, no book, they're not involved in books, deficit family. And yet this child, against all odds, has managed to make a book at home and
But
present
not
it
recognised.
to class.
Not recognized.
Totally
Yes.
unrecognised as any value. I have to say,
Well,
to
that's
give them
school.
credit, that there was a very pregnant silence that followed.
So good.
These are the things I think that are really important, like 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, 18 months later, 3 years later, it bubbles up in the community. How on earth can we capture it?
Yeah. How do we
Because
randomly,
Yeah, it's a
complete serendipity?
Well, I think one of the things just going back to the art play experience, Alex, was you doing a program, and if kids come back, then they're enjoying it. The Start is an example. So there's a little program down at Salamanca Arts Centre, which is the ArTELIER artists run. You do feel like if people come back, then there's something working.
Yeah. And this question of impact is such a big question within all arts, I think, particularly CCD work. But how do we measure that as artists, and how do we capture that information, and how real is that information as well? Like for example, your example, Victoria, like if you asked one person, they'd be like, no impact, and then something else not. So I've tried to, my attempt at this, I sent out a MailChimp to people, and I'll just go back, because there's something that I think is really useful in the feedback process. Is I always do a rating. I get them to do some rating things, which is like a scale thing.
That's lovely.
I make up the scale, which makes them, so they always write, so they do a scale and then they write why underneath. So do you know what I mean? So, this is very much everyday superhero language. So it kind of tunes them into what that is to begin with. This was sent a week afterwards. But I find that scale, and also with artists to reflect, it's good to do oh yeah, this was really great, or this wasn't so great, and then articulate why as a kind of precursor. And also trying to get this for the everyday superhero, we're really trying to understand what the work is, and so trying to get other people to write our marketing material was a key objective. And then we have the highlights and the improve. But the one that I was super interested in was this one, which was, after everyday superhero, has there been any change in your child you brought along? So we didn't get heaps of responses, as is the nature of sending emails out afterwards. We only got 14 responses, but it was great. People said no, and it was great. People said yes. But then we asked them what, for me, this is the most useful feedback, is we've referred to the concept of inner superpowers and how we can all do good things, as well as some of the world problems, but those conversations have probably been led by me. The child I was paired up with gave me the superhero power, amazing patience and kindness, and it was actually incredibly moving. I've kept the little badge she wrote it and hung it in my kitchen. Child keeps asking for updates on his world problem. It's, those comment elements, for me, that was this question's really good, and it's giving me feedback, and also can make me articulate better what the impact of this work is. And I guess this is another simple thing that I'm just starting to fall in love with SurveyMonkey, because it gives you numbers and things that come out, but it could also allow you to write some comments. And for some people, it's really good to have that time away from the work to then come back and respond. And we actually had a question in there that said, can you describe what everyday superhero, and then is the child that you brought near you, can you ask them how they describe everyday superhero? So we got them to type in what the child was directly saying to them. So kind of developing what these ways are, because I think this stuff's really good for the advocacy of the work, and also helps me articulate to people what it is, because I think it takes a while for me to understand what the work is doing, and this really helps me articulate it and refer and understand what we're hitting. So that's my job there.
If you're making, just going back to sort of the grant application, you've got quite a lot of you've got a variety of tool, responses, and as you say, you've got photographs. Words. Do you put something like that in an application, or is that on would you put those quotes on a PowerPoint or in a text application? Things people have said.
Yeah, I do quotes. I usually have a quotable quotes page that I'd put into a funding application. Yeah, so I do use them, particularly if we've done a seeding development and then the yeah, so in the development process we'll put on this is what people have said. Like I always have comments books and things, but I just don't find that the depth of response I got from that was so much better than the scribble straight after the show in 5 minutes.
Richer.
Yeah, so much richer. Yeah, and also gave me time to think about it as well afterwards in a different way. So I have become a fan of that process. Yeah. I just wanted to share a little activity as a final moment. I feel like there was so much to talk about in this, and I haven't hit all the points I wanted to, but I also feel like I've probably bombarded you with enough questions to feel quite full. Simon, was there, can I grab that A4 paper and masking tape and string? So can everyone grab a piece of string?
Oh yeah, got that coming.
Oh yeah.
Wool.
Yeah, so maybe clear a bit of space so you've got, yeah, just wool is great. Awesome. Great.
And then take one each. They're 2 meters long, so they're long.
Thank you.
They're probably tangled.
Yeah, so maybe find a bit of space. You might want to spread out actually for this. Find a bit of space, grab a piece of string. So while you're doing that, I'll just say this is a process that Catherine Dawson did with us when I did a project at Carclew in Adelaide. She's a pretty amazing arts researcher that talks about reflective practice. I don't know, have you come across her, Victoria and Simon?
No, I haven't.
Catherine Dawson.
Sorry.
We'll do two. We'll join. We can join.
I've cut them too short.
Yeah.
That's okay. We'll use with what we've got. It's good. A meter's fine. You'll just have to work small.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and there should be some, you might want some masking tape bits. So you might want to take off some and just pop them on your arm for like little tabs or whatever tape you've got, but also obviously move.
No idea what's happening. This is great.
What are we doing?
What are we doing? So the idea is that we're going to just spend a couple of minutes reflecting on this conversation, this greater conversation or this presentation, and just as part of that, use your string to make a drawing on the page. So if we start with what we began with, which was we started about thinking about why we work with children. So you might want to tape the beginning of your piece of string on the page, or find a starting point for your piece of string. So this 1.5 hours is the length of the string or the wool. And you can do this in whatever way you want, but we'll make a journey, I guess, of this experience. Feel free to annotate if you want to. This is a process of active reflection for you. So just thinking about at the beginning, so I'll just talk us through what we went through. So thinking about that beginning conversation about why we work with children and why, and all of the answers that came from that, and this is that to moving on to considering what a reflective practice is, looking at what Kolb thought to then what I thought to then your own drawing and anything that happened within that. to then considering about your own ideas and planning. We talked about the meditative moments, those moments. Are you guys with me, or are we all a bit all over the place still? It's hard to tell.
At lunch.
Still here. Around the corner.
Over here.
Okay, you're there. Yeah.
Alex, can you just start from the top again?
Yeah, should I start from the top? Okay. Does everybody feel like they have an understanding of what we're doing?
Yeah.
Yep, great. Okay, so first conversation was about why we work with children. And then we talked about our reflective processes, and we talked about spirals and circles, and reflected. I shared my own, and we reflected. We looked at each other's and how we do things differently, and how our brains work differently, and how it seems continual. And then we looked at our ideas and planning, and what some of the points that we came out there was about the need for like these meditative moments, making cups of tea, walking, doing the gardening and weeding, how we do different brainstorming from big bits of butcher's paper to small books where we can turn the page, the importance of talking to someone, having peers, walking and talking, and then how then the limitations may come in at the beginning or at the end, and how the planning is reflective of who it's for. And then we talked about documentation, and I showed you the video, Future Postal Service, and we had a great discussion around authenticity within videos and the schmickness, who that's for versus funding, and how we need a multiplicity of different documentation for different audiences. I then talked about the documentation of the postcards and in different works, and how the documentation has become its own artwork, and how that's been used, and how that's part of the process and kind of free, I guess, to then how we use other people to help us document. So whether that's hashtags within something, or House of Muchness doing video documentation. And how task for documentation is useful. Then we talked about feedback and the different people that provide feedback, and how we capture that, and how some little tools that we use, you'll talk about it later, about how you get feedback from children, and drawing and cooking and show and tell, and how do we get that authentic, or that true response, but also how it sometimes happens later is what we, the really gem of the understanding. And I just think about, but wouldn't it have been great for somebody to be videoing that moment on the oval of the child explaining what had just happened to them? How great that would have been as an artist who'd run that workshop to have that information, understand the impact or what they took from the workshop. To the type of questions you ask, I wonder, what did no one notice? What questions we ask, which is a whole other topic, I think. What questions do we ask for feedback? And I talked about my love of MailChimp, SurveyMonkey at the moment, and how by sending something out after the events provided me with much richer feedback. And just how we measure impact is a massive thing, and how do we do that better, and how just this little action has provided that for me. But it's a massive consideration. And then we're here at the end. And hopefully you're at the end of your string and you've had some time to reflect. But it'd be really great for me if you could think about one thing that's been interesting in this workshop, or one idea or one concept that you're kind of thinking about, like what's that gem, or what's that thing that question or that idea that you've come across in this session, to let me know what that is when you're ready. Not that I can see many of you.
I'm just going to send
maybe
you.
when you're ready. Maybe when you're ready, come back to the table.
You got your phone there?
Yes.
I'm just going to
send
you pictures of people's, if that's all right.
Oh, amazing.
Can I do that? Can I do
yes,
that?
please.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah, great.
Oh, right. And the important part.
Important
part is.
I've got one of those as well.
There's an important part, the second one, which is.
It's still going.
The
String going.
End of the string. You getting these?
Yeah, I am. Beautiful.
I do yours.
Yeah.
That's got my feet in. Can you take it?
Just to respond to the question you just asked us, I think for me, I've really found valuable the idea of the reflecting and documenting, and how that contributes to the flow of our working, and how all of this feeds in and generates a stronger flow and push in our practice. So it strengthens and solidifies what we do and propels us forward as well.
And we've got to make time to do it.
Yeah.
I do think, Alex, I always quote that thing of us making the applications have that process built in. I think I think people are thinking about, people do that a bit more and appreciate it. But it was a luxury we had in a way, but I think it's about the way funding organisations. I think, well, my thought is that I think more funding organisations than artists think would love to see artists putting more reflection in their applications. I'm sure, you get applications into the Australia Council. I think if people put that in, I think it strengthens it, not weakens it.
Having said that, I think that often I don't know how much it's changed now, because I hardly ever, well, I don't write quite so many applications these days. But just that focus on impact was such an awful understanding, right? Maybe not. It's somehow sort of so reduced, such a reductive question in terms of how you were expected to demonstrate this impact, that somehow it mitigated against reflection. And I do think there's so much that still needs to happen to improve the quality of funding bodies, their questions, and their processes, because it's a constant process of having to change and shift and react, because it has driven us down a long road of I think ones don't serve the ends that everybody wants. Poor considered questions and trying to fit everything in neat boxes.
Totally. And it's really important to remember, I think, sometimes we're at the mercy of funding bodies, but sometimes we can create our own reasons for doing things.
Yeah.
And like really the impact for me, it's really important for me, like to understand what the work does and what, that's more for me in some ways. Yes, it can help funding applications and things, but I don't think you can quantify it number-wise. And I don't think,
that's right.
One thing I really enjoyed about the session today was that beginning point of why do we work with children. Lovely to have it anchored in something that obviously connects with us very deeply, and then moving into documentation and reflection and thinking about things that can be a bit dry in the whole process. So we could have that nice rich kind of beginning point.
I have totally gone way over time. Thanks for letting me do that, Simon and everyone.
So you're getting more through, Alex.
Yeah, they're great.
I'm not quite sure how that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alex, for this morning.
Thank you so much.
Are we wrapping it up there?
Yeah. Yes, it's time.
I wish we could jump out.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's all looking around. Right, Alex, you've got to come and do a residency here. You know that.
Sorry?
Got to come and do a residency here.
I know. It's just very far away, Simon. I keep thinking. I'm hoping June, July this year. But
how long have you been in Perth?
4 years now. Yeah.
We've just stolen a Perth person to come and live in Hobart.
Sorry?
We've just stolen a Perth person to come and live in Hobart. So
is that Lauren?
Isabella Stone.
Oh no, her name's familiar, but I can't think of her. But Lauren Kronmeyer's moved as well not so long ago. Lots of reasons to go to Tassie. Just need to make it happen.
Thanks for putting all that effort into the presentation. Really, really great.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing all the ideas, and it was a great opportunity to think about this stuff.
Think about this afternoon when we're just carrying on with this discussion, but we're going to have lunch. These things, everybody brings something for lunch, so we don't really know what's for lunch. Whatever's down the other end of the room.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Alex.
Well, enjoy. Lovely to meet you all.
Nice to see you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.